What if the Indian subcontinent was never divided? It's a massive question, right? One that haunts, well, over 1 billion people. So today we're going to dive into a fascinating alternate history, one that's actually grounded in real historical patterns, to explore what might have been.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we're not going to start in the past. Nope, we're going to jump into a possible future, a future that never actually happened.
All right, picture this. The year is 2026. You're in Mumbai, it's as bustling and full of life as ever.
And we're following a woman named Fatima Ahmed. In this reality, Fatima is the chief technology officer of a huge corporation, and her colleagues, they're in Lahore. But Lahore isn't in another country, it's just another city, you know? They connect instantly with holograms for a meeting. And that violent partition her grandmother used to tell her stories about? For Fatima's generation, that's all it is. A story, a bad dream they never had to live through.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. No borders, no visas, no bad blood. Just a simple 4-hour train ride. That's it, connecting two massive cultural and economic hubs. That one little detail, it shows you a totally different world. But it's not our world, is it?
So, now we have to pull back. We're going to leave that alternate 2026 and come crashing right back into our own timeline.
Because in our world, 1947, it happened. The partition of British India wasn't just some historical footnote. It was a cataclysm, an event that completely redrew the map and left scars that are still there today. And the fallout, I mean, it was staggering. We're talking an estimated 1 million people killed in riots, millions more forced to flee their homes in one of the biggest, most chaotic migrations ever. And that was just the beginning. It set the stage for 75 years of wars, a terrifying nuclear standoff in Kargil, and horrific terror attacks. This isn't the what-if scenario anymore. This is our real, actual history. Which brings us to the absolute heart of the matter, the core question that people, historians, citizens, everyone have been grappling with for, more than 75 years now. Was this world we live in, was it inevitable? This reality of militarized borders, of nuclear neighbors, was it the only way things could have gone? Or was there another path, another choice that got lost in all the chaos?
Now, I want to be really clear about something here. When we talk about exploring that other path, this isn't some fantasy novel. It's not just wishful thinking. This is a serious historical exercise.
It actually has a name, counterfactual history. And the way it works is, you take a major breaking point, like the decision to partition, and you look at all the real historical forces that were already in play. Then you figure out how those same forces could have, plausibly pushed things in a different direction. The key word there is plausibly. We're not talking about fiction here.
And hey, this isn't just a theory either. History gives us real-world examples. Look at Switzerland, right? A confederation that holds together multiple language groups. Or think about Canada and how it's managed Quebec nationalism. You can even look at the truth and reconciliation process in South Africa. All these places show that it is possible to deal with huge, deep divisions inside a single country.
So the big question is how? How could it have been different? Well, the analysis we're looking at today breaks it down into 5 key areas, 5 major forces.
Okay, so the source we're digging into traces 5 major forces that were at play between 1917 and 1947, forces that almost kept the subcontinent whole. You've got political, economic, demographic, cultural, and even technological forces. For example, think about the economic ones. The entire railway and canal system was totally integrated. It made absolutely no sense to split it up. Or what about the cultural forces? For centuries, you had shared music, food, and languages that totally cut across religious lines. Demographically, people were so mixed together that drawing a clean line on a map was, it was basically impossible. And even technology, things like the radio and movies, were creating this one single pop culture for the whole subcontinent. The whole point is, all these forces were actually pushing against the idea of partition. The argument is that different political choices could have leaned into these forces and led to a completely different world.
And that really leaves us with this one final, really powerful idea. Maybe the goal here isn't to say, a united India was 100% possible. Maybe the real point is to challenge the idea that the world we have now was inevitable. To see our present not as some kind of destiny, but as the result of choices, human choices, made under incredible pressure. And when you think about it that way, that changes everything about how you look at the past, doesn't it?
In August of 1947, one of the biggest and honestly one of the most tragic events of the entire 20th century took place. We're talking about the partition of British India. It created two new independent nations, India and Pakistan. But this was no simple celebration of freedom. It was a complete cataclysm, one that literally redrew the map in blood. So let's get into how this all happened, because believe me, the shockwaves from this event, well, they're still shaping our world today.
1 to 2 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's how many people are estimated to have been killed, and not over years, but in just a matter of months. And you have to understand, this wasn't some conventional war with soldiers on a battlefield. No, this was neighbor turning against neighbor. It was an absolute frenzy of violence.
And on top of that staggering death toll, you have the refugees. We're talking somewhere between 10 and 20 million people, uprooted from their homes, forced to literally run for their lives. This became the single largest mass migration in all of human history. An entire generation just displaced in the blink of an eye.
But you know, these are just numbers, and they can be so huge they're hard to even comprehend. So let's bring it down to a human level. Let's talk about Bashir Ahmed. For 23 years, he was a textile merchant, knew all his Hindu neighbors, his business partners, and then suddenly, overnight, those same people wouldn't even look him in the eye. He lost everything: his shop, his home, his community. And his story? Well, it was the story of millions of people. A whole lifetime of trust just wiped out by a line drawn on a map.
Okay, so how on earth did this happen? I mean, how does a society where people have lived side by side for centuries just erupt into this kind of unimaginable violence? You know, the standard story we usually hear, it doesn't quite cover it. It's flawed.
So, what really caused this unprecedented catastrophe? That's the question we really need to dig into. Was this all just inevitable? Was it bound to happen? Or was it actually the result of some very specific decisions and, frankly, some absolutely catastrophic mistakes? So the standard narrative you often hear is that this was all about an inevitable religious clash, right? That there were centuries of animosity and that Jinnah's demand for Pakistan was the final straw. But when you dig deeper, the picture gets way more complicated. You start to see things like the British divide and rule policy, a series of major political miscalculations, and an incredibly hasty, almost chaotic exit by the British. It's not so simple.
So let's talk about those seeds of division, because this wasn't some kind of spontaneous fire that just broke out. No, this was a crisis that was carefully, and you could argue very carelessly built and manufactured over decades. And it really starts with this classic colonial strategy, divide and rule. It's pretty straightforward, really. If you're the colonial power, you create or just really emphasize the internal divisions in the population. Why? To keep them from uniting against you. The British did this masterfully. By making religious differences official, political things, they basically trained people to see themselves as Hindus or Muslims or Sikhs first, and as Indians second.
And you can see how this escalates over time. It really gets going in 1909, when the British create separate electorates for Muslims. Suddenly, your religion isn't just a faith, it's a political box you're put in. Fast forward to the late 30s. The Congress Party gets into power in several provinces, but they failed to include Muslim politicians in any meaningful way. This just alienates people further. By 1946, there's a last-ditch effort for united federal India, and it fails. And then the final blow. In 1947, the British decide to rush their exit, cutting the timeline from 18 months down to just 10. That just lit the fuse on an already explosive situation.
And here's a really crucial point. The Muslim League, the party that was pushing so hard for a separate Pakistan, they weren't always this major political force. Not at all. Their power grew not just from popular support, but directly because of these political blunders we're talking about, from both the British and the Congress Party. All those mistakes made their message of separation seem like the only option left for a lot of people.
Okay, so let's be clear. This isn't just ancient history. The decisions made back in 1947 have a direct line to today. They've had a devastating and an ongoing impact on the entire subcontinent for more than 75 years now.
I mean, just look at the price that's been paid. 4 wars between India and Pakistan, the constant, unresolved conflict over Kashmir, a full-blown nuclear arms race between 2 countries that share a border, and on top of all that, this persistent, often toxic religious nationalism, where each country seems to define itself by not being the other.
And the opportunity cost here is just staggering. Think about it. All the money, all the resources, all the human talent that gets poured into military spending on both sides. What if that was used for education, for healthcare, for infrastructure, We're talking about improving the lives of hundreds of millions of people. But instead, the legacy of partition is this constant state of being ready for war.
So why does this all matter so much, even now? Well, because beyond all the geopolitics and the armies, the human and the economic wounds, they've never really healed. When the land was partitioned, so were its people, and so was its potential.
I mean, to this day, you have families that are split across a border they never wanted. You have this incredibly rich shared culture that's just strangled by red tape and suspicion. This whole region is a natural economic zone, but it's completely fragmented. And think about this. During the same time period, Europe, which was torn apart by 2 world wars, managed to build the European Union. That is the kind of lost potential we're talking about.
And all of this, it leads you to ask these huge, haunting questions. Could it have all gone down differently? Were there specific moments, actual turning points, where a different choice could have led to a totally different future?
Like what if back in 1937, the Congress Party had decided to be more inclusive? What if they had actually shared power with Muslim leaders? Could that one decision have rebuilt the trust that was already starting to crumble?
Or here's another one. What if the British hadn't just sprinted for the exit? What if they'd stuck to their original plan of 18 months? Would that have been enough time for a more orderly and far less bloody transfer of power?
And maybe this is the biggest what if of them all. What if that 1946 plan, the one for a united federal India where Muslim majority areas would have a ton of autonomy, what if everyone had just said yes to that deal?
Which brings us to the final and most profound question of all. What would the subcontinent look like today if partition had never happened? Just try to imagine it. The politics, the economy, the culture. It's not just some academic question, is it? It's a ghost that still haunts the present day, and it's a question we should all be asking.
All right, let's jump right in. Today, we are going to explore one of modern history's greatest what-ifs. We're talking about a past that was so close to happening, a world or the map of South Asia would look completely different than it does today. Ready? Let's do this. I want you to just take a second and step into an alternate timeline with me. Let's leave our world behind and travel back to the middle of the 20th century. Picture it. August 1947. Instead of violence and division, there are just massive celebrations. One single Independence Day for everyone, from the mountains of the Khyber Pass to the shores of Bengal, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, all celebrating together. Not 2 new countries, but one giant free nation. Now, this isn't just some work of fiction. For decades, this was the actual goal, and the path to get there was very, very real. So how did this incredible vision of united India get so close, only to completely fall apart at the last minute? That's what we're going to uncover. To really understand this other possibility, we have to start with a man who most people think they know, but his early career, well, it's gonna surprise you. So who said that? None other than Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the man we all know as the founder of Pakistan. It's kind of shocking to hear, right? But back in 1916, he was famous for being the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. He genuinely believed that a secular, united India was the only way forward. And that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do you get from that guy to the man who demanded a separate nation? The answer isn't some ancient, unavoidable conflict. It's about specific political decisions and some huge missed opportunities. It's like a historical detective story, and the clues show us a totally different outcome was right there for the taking. And, you know, for a long time, this cooperation wasn't just hopeful talk. It was how things actually worked. You had the Lucknow Pact, where Congress and the Muslim League formally teamed up. You had the Caliphate movement, where Hindus and Muslims were literally marching in the streets together against the British. For years, unity was the game plan. So, if things were working, what happened? Where did it all go so wrong? Well, history is never about just one single moment. But in this case, we can zoom in on 2 critical points in time, 2 forks in the road where the path to partition was chosen. Okay, first up, the 1937 provincial elections. This was a huge deal. For the first time, Indians were getting a real taste of self-government. This election was the first big test of whether different parties could share power, and boy, did its outcome change everything. So, look at the results. The Muslim League, well, they didn't do very well. They won less than a quarter of the seats that were set aside for Muslims. And this is where the Indian National Congress made a huge, and I mean huge, miscalculation. They looked at these numbers and thought, hey, we don't really need these guys. And what happened next is just crucial. Instead of being generous in their victory and inviting the League into government, Congress basically slammed the door in their face. They refused to form coalition governments. They told League members, if you want to be in power, you have to quit your party and join ours. For Jinnah, who'd spent his whole career trying to build bridges, this was a complete betrayal. And the effect was immediate and explosive. Look at this number. In just 2 years, the Muslim League's membership skyrocketed. We're talking from just a few thousand to over 2 million people. Why? Because when Congress shut them out, millions of Muslims felt they had nowhere else to go. The League went from a small club of elites to a massive popular movement, almost overnight. Okay, fast forward a few years. The divide is getting wider. But believe it or not, there was one last incredible chance to keep India together. It came just 1 year before independence. The British sent a high-powered team with a really clever plan to avoid partition. This was it, the last best hope. And the plan itself was pretty genius. It was a 3-level system. At the top, you'd have a very weak central government, only handling things like defense and foreign affairs. Then, provinces could band together into groups, which would give Muslim-majority regions a ton of autonomy. And finally, the individual provinces would be really powerful, controlling everything else. It was a way for everyone to stay in one country, but still have control over their own affairs. And here's the craziest part. At first, both sides said yes. Jinnah and the League accepted it. Congress accepted it. Unity was right there, literally within their grasp. But then, at a press conference, Jawaharlal Nehru casually mentioned that once Congress was in power, they could pretty much change the plan however they wanted. For Jinnah, that was the final straw. He felt he couldn't trust them, he pulled the League's support, and just like that, the last chance for united India was gone. So this federal solution, this path that wasn't taken, was it just a crazy pipe dream? Absolutely not. In fact, it's a model that has worked in other really diverse countries all around the world. Just take a look. You've got Switzerland with all its different languages and religions, held together because the local regions, the cantons, have most of the power. Or Canada, which kept Quebec from leaving by giving it a huge amount of autonomy. These places prove that you can have deep divisions without breaking the country apart, as long as you have a flexible system. So you see, the pieces were all there. Just imagine, if Congress had shared power back in 37, and if both sides had just stuck with that cabinet mission plan in 46, a united federal India wasn't just possible, it was entirely plausible. Exploring this alternate history, you can't help but wonder, what would that alternate present look like? What kind of country would this united India be today? Well, first, just think about the sheer size of it. If you combine the populations of today's India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, you get a single country of almost 1.9 billion people. That would be the largest nation on Earth, and it wouldn't even be close. And the economy, wow, imagine all those resources, all that human talent, inside one single market. And think of all the money, the trillions of dollars that these countries have spent on their militaries fighting each other. What if all of that had been spent on roads, schools, and hospitals instead? But of course, here's the really tough question. The tensions were very real. Would this kind of loose federal structure have been enough to keep it all together? Or would this giant, diverse nation have eventually broken down into civil war? Honestly, there's no easy answer to that one. But in the end, that's really the whole point. This journey shows us that partition was never some unavoidable destiny. It was the result of choices, a handful of choices made by a few leaders at a few critical moments. And that's the big takeaway here. History isn't written in stone. The world we live in was built by choices, and it's fascinating to think about the other worlds that could have been if only they had chosen differently. What if one of the most painful, most violent events of the 20th century just never happened? What if the economic logic that tied a whole subcontinent together had actually won out over the political fears that tore it apart? Today, we're going to explore a past that could have been and a future that might have followed. Imagine this. The year is 2026. And the Indian subcontinent isn't 3 separate nations. Nope. It's one vast, thriving federation. It is the world's largest economy, all powered by a single market of nearly 2 billion people. High-speed trains are just gliding seamlessly from Karachi to Calcutta. The mighty Indus River, it's a shared lifeline, managed for everyone's prosperity, not some contentious border. And that cultural and commercial lifeblood, it just flows freely from Lahore to Amritsar, from Dhaka to Calcutta, with no border in sight. So, is this just a fantasy, a pipe dream, or was this future a very real possibility, one that was rooted in the hard economic realities of the 1940s? Okay, so let's dive right into this. To understand this alternate path, we first have to get our heads around just how deeply interwoven the economy of British India truly was. I mean, this wasn't just a political entity held together by force. It was a single, humming economic machine. Let's go back in time. Picture it. Bombay, 1925. On the floor of the stock exchange, you'd find partners like Abdul Karim Ganchi, a Muslim, and Jantilal Mehta, a Hindu. Their company, Ganchi and Mehta Limited, it exported textiles, and when they sat down to do business, you know what mattered? Profit margins and shipping schedules. That's it. Their partnership was a perfect snapshot of the entire subcontinent's economic life. And the jute supply chain is just a perfect example of how interconnected everything really was. Okay, so the raw jute was grown out in the fields of Muslim-majority East Bengal. It was then put on trains and transported to the mills in Hindu-majority Calcutta to be processed. And then, finally, it was exported to the rest of the world from Calcutta's port. You see, one part couldn't function without the other. It was a totally symbiotic relationship. Now here's where it gets really interesting, because the demographics themselves actually argued against a clean split. Back in 1941, yeah, Muslims made up about a quarter of the population, but they weren't in one neat little block you could just carve out. No, they were spread all across the subcontinent. Millions of people living in places like UP and Bombay, completely intertwined economically and socially with their Hindu and Sikh neighbors. Any attempt to draw a line was destined to be a messy human catastrophe. So, if the economic case for staying together was so strong, and the demographic case was so clear, why did it all fall apart? Well, this is where that powerful, rational logic of economics slammed headfirst into the even more powerful, primal emotion of fear. And this really brings us to the central question, doesn't it? If partition made absolutely no economic sense for anyone, not for the mill owner in Calcutta, not for the farmer in Punjab, why did it happen? And here's the crucial point. When the communal riots erupted, when violence just swept through cities, that rational calculus of profit and loss was completely overwhelmed. The logic of shared markets, it couldn't compete with the raw fear of communal violence. Interdependence was no match for the primal need for physical safety. The survival instinct, plain and simple, trumped supply chain efficiency. But what if there was another way? A path where politics was used not to divide people, but to protect that shared economic prosperity. A path built on a totally different kind of constitution. And believe me, this isn't a fantasy. Just look at Europe after World War II. You had nations that had literally just finished destroying each other, and they came together to form the European coal and steel community. The idea was simple, but it was genius. Bind the core industries of France and Germany so tightly together that another war between them would become economically unthinkable, basically economic suicide. And you know what? It worked. It provides this fascinating model for what could have happened in India. So, in our alternate timeline, the leaders of the subcontinent adopt that same logic. They design a federal constitution that specifically protects economic integration. We're talking about things like automatic free trade zones, joint management of critical rivers and railways, a coordinated industrial policy to build up steel and energy, all while giving the provinces a ton of autonomy over their own local affairs. You preserve the economic unity, but you respect the political diversity. In our real history, the outcome of division was one of the largest, most violent migrations in all of human history. Somewhere between 10 and 20 million people were uprooted from their homes, forced to flee for their lives. And in the alternate timeline, where economic foresight prevailed, the number of refugees created by partition is 0. Just let that sink in. The immense human tragedy, the generational trauma, it's just avoided. So let's look at the long-term consequences of this single, different choice. What does the legacy of unity look like decades down the line as we get back to that vision of 2026? Well, the fruits of unity are everywhere. The Indus River system is managed as a single entity, which boosts agriculture for everybody and prevents decades of water disputes. The vast railway network, it's still intact, a powerful engine for trade. Punjab's wheat fields aren't sliced in two by a border. Bengal's jute economy is still whole. And the industrial hubs in places like Karachi and Lahore are fueled by coal from Bihar, just as they always were. And over time, these economic ties would have just gotten stronger and stronger. By, say, 1970, the business networks connecting Karachi, Bombay, Delhi, and Dhaka would be so valuable, so essential to so many powerful people that the idea of breaking them apart for political reasons would become too costly to even consider. It would be unthinkable. And this brings us to our final thought. We focused a lot on the economics, but what does this alternate history really mean for the people? If the merchants and the farmers, the traders and the mill owners, if their argument had won the day, what would that society feel like today? Would the music, the films, the food, the families, would they have all evolved differently without the scars of division? That's the question we're left with. What if the single biggest, most defining event in modern South Asian history just never happened? What if India was never partitioned? That's exactly what we're going to dive into today. The cultural history of a road not taken, a story of what might have been. Let's explore this together. Now, this scene, it's not some fantasy. It's a real snapshot of a shared cultural life that was thriving all across the subcontinent. It was a world where who you were was layered, it was complex, and it was all deeply, deeply interconnected. Yeah, that scene from Lahore, that wasn't some one-off thing, not an exception. In many parts of India, it was pretty much the norm. It was the result of centuries of people living side by side, creating something historians call a composite culture. So what did that actually look and feel like for everyday people? At its heart, it's all about fusion. Think of it like this beautiful concept, Ganga-Jamuni Tehzeeb, the idea of two mighty rivers, the Ganga and the Yamuna, flowing together to create something totally new, something even more powerful. And this wasn't just a poetic idea. It was a reality people lived every single day. And this fusion, it wasn't just on the surface. It went deep. I mean, take language. Urdu wasn't just a Muslim language, no way. It was the language of art, of poetry, of the courts, spoken by Hindus and Muslims alike. In music, a Muslim ustad teaching a Hindu disciple, that was completely normal. And even in the exciting new world of cinema, it was a total melting pot. You had artists from every community imaginable, creating these incredible stories for everyone. So you gotta ask, right? If this shared culture was so strong, so deeply woven into the fabric of society, how on earth did it all unravel so fast? Well, the answer lies in how separate cultural and political worlds were deliberately built. You can just see this pattern starting to take shape here. New organizations coming from all sides started to hammer home the idea of religious separateness over that shared heritage. And this wasn't just about identity politics, it tapped into very real fears people had about power and jobs in a future independent India. That push for Hindi after 1937, for example. For the Muslim elites whose whole professional world was built on Urdu, it felt like their culture was being deliberately erased. It felt like a threat. And this was it. This was the critical fork in the road. On one side, you have the lived reality for millions, a shared world of language, music, and life. But on the other, this new political project starts gaining ground, pushing for separate languages, separate schools, and identities defined only by religion. And little by little, this new idea started to chip away at the old way of life. But here's the thing. It didn't have to be this way. It wasn't inevitable. There was a political path that could have protected that unity. And this, right here, is the heart of our whole alternate history, a series of constitutional compromises that chose unity over division. So what would that have looked like? Well, it really boils down to three big moves. First, you get coalition governments that actually share power, instead of a winner-takes-all approach. Second, you write explicit protections for languages like Urdu right into the Constitution, making them permanent. And third, and this might be the most important one, you create a true federal structure where provinces like Punjab and Bengal get to call the shots on their own culture and education. And listen, this isn't just wishful thinking, some kind of fantasy. We have real-world models for this. Just look at Canada, which accommodates a distinct French-speaking Quebec, or Switzerland, which somehow juggles 4 official languages. These countries are living proof that a multicultural federal state can absolutely work, preserving unique cultures inside one unified nation. Okay, so let's do it. Let's jump forward in time. Let's imagine we're in that India right now, in 2026. what would the cultural landscape of this undivided country actually look and feel like today? First up, let's talk about movies, a huge cultural force, right? Instead of a split industry, picture a creative powerhouse, a Bombay, Lahore, Karachi triangle. The best artists collaborate freely, no borders to worry about. The films they create aren't about tension and division. Instead, they become this incredible global advertisement for India's composite culture. Talk about soft power. And the music? Oh, the music would be on another level. Without those artificial borders, the incredible traditions of Hindustani classical, Qawwali, Sufi rock, they would all flourish and fuse in amazing new ways. The annual Lahore Music Festival, it wouldn't just be a Pakistani event, it would be a major national celebration for all of India, from coast to coast. And the ripple effects politically, wow, they would have been massive. Without an external other to define against, Hindu nationalism just doesn't get the same kind of oxygen. And without the constant fear of being culturally steamrolled in a Hindu-majority state, Muslim separatism loses its main argument. The entire political conversation of the country just fundamentally changes. And this all comes down to a human level, right? It's not just about big politics. Think about someone like Fatima Ahmed, a CTO in Mumbai. In this alternate 2026, she wears her hijab, and her colleague Rajesh never gives it a second thought or questions her loyalty. The team in Lahore she's on a video call with, it's a mix of Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, all working on the next big thing. Her success, her identity, it isn't a political statement, it's just normal. That is the real, tangible result of this different path. So exploring this alternate timeline, it doesn't just make us rethink the past, it actually throws up some incredible new questions about the future. Just think about it for a second. All the money, the resources, the human energy spent on defense and conflict for decades, what if it was all repurposed? Could a united subcontinent with its immense coastline, its deserts, its rivers, have become the undisputed global leader in renewable energy by now? And what about tech? I mean, seriously, imagine the combined brain power, the entrepreneurial drive of Mumbai, Karachi, and Lahore, all working together in one seamless economic zone. Could that have created a tech ecosystem powerful enough to go head-to-head with Silicon Valley? And that brings us to the biggest question of them all. How would the entire world be different with a single, stable, democratic South Asian superpower of nearly 2 billion people? What would that mean for global trade, for geopolitics, and for our collective ability to tackle the huge challenges facing all of us? It's a powerful thought to end on, and a real reminder that the world we live in is just one of many, many possibilities.
What if the most important event in a subcontinent's history wasn't about politics, but about technology? We're going to explore a different kind of alternate history today. Forget battles and borders for a minute. Think railways, power grids, and data flows. We're going to look at the entire subcontinent as one huge integrated machine and ask a pretty simple question. What if it had never been split apart?
So, to do that, I want you to forget the timeline you know. Let's just step into another one. The year is 2026, and the place? It's a bustling, hyper-modern, and undivided subcontinent.
In Bombay, a software architect named Fatima Ahmed is joining her daily team meeting. Her colleagues, though, they're not in the room. They're in Lahore, but they appear right there with her as perfect, life-sized holograms. The connection is totally flawless, zero lag. Now, this isn't science fiction, it's just the logical result of a single, unified fiber optic network that was built over decades. But here's the thing. This future wasn't just a lucky accident. To understand how they got here, we've got to go back and look at the system it was all built on, a system that was already in place long before 1947.
You see, that interconnected future we just imagined, it wasn't some kind of fantasy. It was a reality that was being built, piece by piece, long before any borders were ever drawn. The entire subcontinent was literally being woven together by steel, water, and wire.
I mean, just look at this timeline. By 1917, the railway network was already the fourth largest on the entire planet, a massive web connecting everything. Then in the 20s, you have these huge irrigation projects that treated entire river systems as one single cohesive thing. Radio comes along in 27, creating this shared cultural space where people are listening to the same stuff. And get this, by the 30s, the first electrical grids were being designed to power whole regions, completely ignoring the lines that would soon be drawn all over the maps.
And all this interdependence, it really rested on four main pillars. The railways meant that wheat from the Punjab could easily feed Bengal. Coal from Bihar could power the factories in Karachi. The water systems turned deserts green. The power grids were designed based on engineering logic, not political squabbles. And you have these specialized industrial centers, dude here, cotton there, creating one continent-wide supply chain. It was, for all intents and purposes, one economic body.
And this quote just nails it, doesn't it? The physical reality of the land, where the rivers flowed, where the resources were, it was totally blind to the political divisions that were on the horizon. The engineers, whether they were Hindu, Muslim, or Sikh, they were building for a single unified system. Why? Because that's what the land and the technology demanded. It just made sense.
And then that entire system was shattered. The political decision of partition wasn't just about drawing a line on a map. No, it was a direct assault on this living, breathing, integrated technological body. It was, from a purely technical standpoint, a catastrophe.
The contrast is just stark. All of a sudden, the huge railway workshops in Lahore are in a different country from the very tracks they were designed to serve. A single shared river system becomes the source of bitter water disputes that last for decades. That unified grid plan, scrapped, forcing both sides to build expensive, redundant systems. The economic arteries of the subcontinent were just severed overnight.
But you have to wonder, right? Was there another way? Well, it turns out there was. There was a real historical turning point, a genuine proposal on the table called the 1946 Cabinet Mission Plan, and it offered a way to avoid this whole technical disaster.
At the very heart of this plan was a brilliant idea: federal infrastructure. And look, this isn't some fantasy concept. It's a proven model. We see it in the US with the Tennessee Valley Authority managing rivers across state lines, or in the EU's unified rail system. The idea is really simple. You just designate these critical networks, the railways, the rivers, the power grids, as shared assets, and you manage them for the good of everybody, based on science and economics, not politics.
And the plan itself was actually pretty straightforward. Step 1, you just identify and officially designate these critical networks. Step 2, you set up joint commissions of experts to manage them based on what works best. And step 3, this is the kicker, you write it into the Constitution that the free flow of goods, power, and people across these networks can never be blocked. It was a blueprint to keep the subcontinent's integrated body whole.
Okay, so let's jump back into our alternate timeline, the one where this plan was actually accepted. Let's see how things would build from there. Let's explore the incredible cascading benefits, the domino effect, that would have unfolded over the next 80 years.
Okay, let's just take the tech industry. In our timeline, innovation exploded in places like Bangalore and Hyderabad. Awesome, right? But in the undivided timeline, with this massive single market and talent that can move freely, you don't just get 2 tech hubs, you get 5. Karachi, Lahore, and Dhaka boom right alongside them, creating an engine for innovation that is just orders of magnitude more powerful.
And the differences across the board are just staggering. Instead of decades of water conflicts, the unified management of the Indus Basin makes the subcontinent the world's #1 wheat exporter. Instead of slow, uneven electrification, universal access is achieved decades earlier. Instead of 2 separate, competing space programs, you get a single, unified global leader. And when a crisis like a pandemic hits, the response is coordinated and efficient, not fractured and chaotic.
And what about those huge, shared challenges? I mean, the Himalayan glaciers that feed all the great rivers, they don't care about borders. So in this timeline, they're managed with a single, smart policy. When a disaster like the massive Kashmir earthquake strikes, aid flows freely. There are no borders to get in the way. And problems like air and water pollution, which drift wherever they want, are managed holistically, as the single, connected problems they actually are.
So to bring this all home, to make this massive idea feel real, let's end with one last picture from this undivided future. A single journey that I think captures everything we've talked about.
18! Just 18 hours. Remember that number. It's the ultimate achievement, the ultimate symbol of this integrated system.
18 hours. That's how long it takes to travel from the shores of the Arabian Sea in Karachi all the way across the landmass to Dhaka, deep in the heart of Bengal. It's a seamless journey on the world's longest domestic high-speed rail line, a trip that in our world is a logistical and political nightmare, basically an impossibility. But here, it's just a daily commute. It's a symbol of a continent that is truly connected.
And all of this leaves us with one final big question. We build infrastructure, our railways, our power grids, our networks, we build them for one fundamental reason: to connect us, to bring people and places closer together. So what happens to our future when our politics seem to be designed to do the exact opposite?
Let's dive into one of modern history's biggest and maybe most tragic what-ifs.
We're going to explore an alternate past for the Indian subcontinent, a past that wasn't just possible, but for decades was actually the most likely thing to happen.
I mean, just think about the world we live in right now. Why is it that two nuclear-armed nations, literally born from the same motherland, are now trapped in this seemingly endless state of hostility?
And why do they both pour billions upon billions of dollars into their militaries? Money that could be building schools, hospitals, and infrastructure that would completely transform the lives of their own people.
And on a really human level, why are families who used to be neighbors and cultures that grew together for centuries now separated by one of the most heavily armed borders on the entire planet?
You know, all these questions really come back to one simple, powerful phrase that you still hear from the older generation. A phrase that holds so much history and so much loss. We used to be one.
Right, so this is the reality we know. A world that was fundamentally shaped and scarred by that division.
But here is the massive question we're digging into today. What if this outcome, the one we all take for granted, was never supposed to happen? What if it wasn't inevitable at all?
To really get it, let's picture two different timelines. In our world, right now, Priya in Delhi might be anxiously watching the news about border tensions. But in this other timeline, Fatima in Mumbai is just casually on a video call with her work colleagues in Lahore and Dhaka, all part of the same team in the same country. And the wild part is, this isn't science fiction. For a very long time, Fatima's world was the one everyone expected.
So let's get into the why. Why was unity not just some idealistic fantasy? We're going to see how, for decades, it was the most logical, rational, and frankly, the most probable future.
And this is a really crucial point to wrap your head around. For a very long time, the idea of dividing India was the fringe concept. The real momentum, all the political and economic signs, were pointing towards a single, united, independent country.
Okay, let's start with the politics. For over 20 years, Hindu-Muslim political cooperation wasn't the exception, it was the rule. You had major agreements like the Lucknow Pact and massive movements like the Khilafat movement. Even Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the man who would later found Pakistan, was a passionate advocate for Hindu-Muslim unity for most of his career. And get this, as late as 1946, the Cabinet Mission Plan laid out a clear path for a united federal India, and at first, every major party agreed to it.
Now let's talk about the money. Because from a purely economic standpoint, splitting up the country was, to put it mildly, a catastrophic idea.
You see, the whole subcontinent worked as one big economic machine. The jute grown in the east was processed in the west, the cotton from one region supplied the mills in another. Partition took a sledgehammer to all of that, wrecking supply chains. In fact, the country's top industrialists put together a famous Bombay Plan in 1944, and their entire vision for a prosperous future was built on the foundation of a united India. Division just made zero economic sense.
So beyond politics and economics, partition ripped right through the heart of something much deeper, a shared cultural soul that had been brewing for centuries.
And this shared culture wasn't some abstract concept, it was real life. It was in the language. Urdu and Hindi are basically two dialects of the same tongue. It was in the music everyone listened to, the food they ate, the festivals they celebrated together. Demographically, partition was a disaster, instantly turning millions of people into vulnerable minorities overnight. A federal, united India would have offered far more safety for everyone.
And finally, there's a simple physical reality you can see just by looking at a map. The very land itself, the rivers, the mountains, the plains, it's all designed to work as one.
I mean, seriously, how do you efficiently manage a massive river system like the Indus between two countries that don't trust each other? It's a logistical nightmare. And the entire railway network, the power grids, the communication lines, all of it was built to operate as a single, integrated system. It was the physical backbone of one nation.
So this is the obvious question, right? If unity made so much sense politically, economically, culturally, and geographically, what on earth went so terribly wrong? What was the breaking point?
Well, here's the tragic timeline. After 2 decades of solid cooperation, a series of political blunders started creating distance. But the real dominoes fell hard and fast in 1946. A single press conference by Nehru torpedoed the Cabinet Mission Plan, that last best hope for unity. And that was immediately followed by the horrific street violence of Direct Action Day. In just a matter of months, decades of progress completely unraveled.
And that's the absolute key to understanding this. All those logical, rational arguments for unity were completely drowned out by one powerful, primal emotion: fear. Once mass violence exploded onto the streets, it was no longer about economic plans or shared culture. It was about pure survival. And in that atmosphere of terror, the idea of splitting into safe religious majority countries suddenly seemed like the only sane choice left.
But you have to ask, was division really the only option? Let's take a quick look at how other complicated, diverse countries have faced these same kinds of crises and managed to stick together.
Just look at these examples. Canada has a powerful separatist movement in Quebec. Spain has dealt with Basque and Catalan nationalism for ages. Switzerland even fought its own religious civil war. But in every single one of these cases, they ultimately chose accommodation and federalism, not division. They proved that you can keep a country together by giving distinct groups a lot of autonomy. It wasn't some fantasy for India, it was a proven political strategy that works.
So this brings us back to today, and it lets us look at the future through the lens of this past that almost happened.
Look, we can't go back and change the past, but the most important takeaway here is that our current reality, the borders, the hostility, the conflict, it wasn't destiny. It was the result of very specific choices made in a moment of extreme fear. Choices that could have gone a different way.
Because the natural logic of the subcontinent, the integrated geography, the shared culture, the incredible economic potential, that's all still there, right underneath the political scars. And when you realize just how probable unity once was, it forces you to ask a really deep question. Not about erasing borders, but about building bridges, about finding cooperation and a shared purpose. What if, in some way, we could be one again?